you're still introducing other people?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So the charge for today is the discussion of Project 2025, Chapter 17, the Department of Justice. And from the document itself, defending the rule of law, I will quote, what they want to do is the restoration of the department's values of independence, impartiality, honesty, integrity, respect, and excellence must serve as first principles for its efforts on all fronts. And if that were true, that would be great or accurate, but it's not. We'll do a little broad overview, and then my plan is to go through some of the recommendations from Project 2025 that have already been adopted by the Trump administration, go through those, and then open it up for discussion and questions. So with regard to the overview, I'm assuming that most of you have read part of 2025 or critique of it, this or that. Other than Rick, I'm not sure anyone's read the whole thing. I have not read the whole document. But the 4 goals of Project 2025, as explained by the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, are 1, to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And 4, secure our God-given rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls, quote, the blessings of liberty. So last summer, before the election, the same Heritage Foundation took a poll and found that of the two-thirds of the voters had heard of Project 2025, but only 14% reported positive thoughts about it, while 47% said they disapproved of the plan. And I think we all remember how candidate Trump tried to distance himself from Project 25, said he hadn't read it, which might be accurate, but he said he had no idea who was behind it, which clearly is not accurate. Because as soon as he was elected, many of the document's contributors were named to the government. Tom Homan, Border Czar, John Ratcliffe, CIA Director, Brendan Carr, FCC Chair, Paul Atkins, SEC Chair, Peter Navarro, Senior Counselor, Michael Anton, Director of State Department Policy Planning, Pete Hoekstra, Ambassador to Canada, and Russell Voigt, Head of the Office of Management and Budget. An analysis by Bloomberg Government found that 37 of the 47 executive orders that came out pretty quickly directly or partially match the recommendations in Project 2025. And so I'm assuming that a lot of us are news junkies to a certain degree. Earlier this month, I remember it was last month already, President Trump was asked 2 simple questions. Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president? And don't you agree that every person in the United States is entitled to due process? Now, I would put forward that any 8th grader or high school junior would know the answers to those questions are yes. But our president's answer was, I don't know. So my take in a lot of the critiques of Project 2025 was the problem that it envisions turning the Department of Justice into a weapon of intense partisanship. And today we'll look at actions already taken by the administration that would significantly impact the Department of Justice. And as I indicated early, of the 18 recommendations, 9 have been completed. And I think Sam sent around a PDF with a chart. If you want to refer to that or put it up on the screen, that's fine. So kind of the overall takeaway from my reading of Chapter 17 is that its impact is that the independence of the Department of Justice will be diminished by increasing direct presidential control over its operations and potentially allowing for politically motivated investigations and prosecutions. Also, we have already seen, as I've indicated, the appointment of political loyalists and the removal of job protections for many civil servants within the department. Before I go through the 9 points here, I want to go back to an article that was in the Atlantic magazine on May 14th, written by retired former federal judge Michael Ludig. It's entitled "The End of the Rule of Law in America." I would consider that a must read in your spare time. May 14th, the Atlantic. And I'm just going to quote a little bit about what he said, because I think the article was just right on, and I've heard him on talk shows since that time. So this is what Judge Ludig has to say. And once again, he's known as a fairly conservative judge, and he's involved in a number of conservative foundations. So he's not, some radical character, although that'd be okay too, but he's not, he's a conservative judge. And he says, the 47th president seems to wish he were king, and he's willing to destroy what is precious about this country to get what he wants. In the first few months of his second administration, Trump has proved himself as an existential threat to the rule of law in America. When Trump assumed the presidency in January, he, like every president before him, swore an oath to faithfully execute the laws of this nation as commanded by the Constitution. In the short time since, Trump hasn't just refused to faithfully execute the laws, he has angrily defied the Constitution and the laws of the United States. In America, where no person is above the law, Trump has shown the nation that he believes he is the law, even promoting that concept on social media soon after assuming office, when he said, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And Judge Ludig concludes, with Congress unwilling and the Supreme Court unable to check his power, there is nothing to stop this president for the next 3.5 years other than the American people. That's us, right? That's us. So I don't know if you're going to follow along on the PDF, but my plan is to kind of give just a synopsis as to the column in green, what those executive orders and those recommendations that have been put in place, what the impact, or just a little further background on them. So the first one is the expansion of the death penalty. And this will be the federal death penalty. And they're advocating for a broader use of capital punishment, including for crimes involving violence and sexual abuse of children. Now, regardless of what you think about the death penalty, the 2008 Supreme Court ruling says that imposing the death penalty for crimes other than homicide or crimes such as treason violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. So regardless how heinous violence can be or sexual abuse of children, that's horrible stuff. Under Supreme Court ruling as of right now, you can't get the death penalty for those. But Trump's action on the death penalty is not surprising, given that more people were executed during his first term than in the 56 years prior. So two, eliminating existing, I want to say DOJ, consent decrees. Now, the consent decree, maybe some of you know, but I'm going to explain it. Consent decrees are typically issued by a court following a DOJ investigation into a pattern of misconduct, usually some problem with the jail system or police department. And while the department doesn't have the authority to actually end these consent agreements, they can ask the courts that are moderating them to do so. Currently, there are 30 active decrees involving law enforcement and jail systems. For example, there was an agreement entered in Ferguson, Missouri, 2 years after Michael Brown was killed. More recently, a consent decree was entered in Minneapolis, where an investigation was launched following the murder of George Floyd. Project 2025 seeks to remove these orders, drastically reducing the oversight of local law enforcement. And they're also planning to close investigations throughout the country, DOJ investigations, and some of the cities, police departments they're talking about: Phoenix, Trenton, New Jersey, Memphis, Tennessee, Mount Vernon, New York, Oklahoma City, and Louisiana State Police, and probably others. So takeaway from that is, consent decrees are put together by consent from all the parties that are involved, the police, the courts, the the attorneys in the area, the population in the area. So they're fashioned as consent of all the moving pieces, and they try to improve whatever the problem was. Number three, that has now been put into effect, which I kind of have to laugh about the title here, but is to avoid politically motivated prosecutions. For example, people who violate the FACE Act, and the FACE Act is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. So the Trump administration now has directed prosecutors to limit enforcement of this law, which safeguards abortion centers, reproductive centers, and pregnancy resource centers. And he calls, right in the executive order, calls it Biden's administration previous use of this the prototypical example of weaponization of the federal government. Number four, that's now gone into effect, is to issue guidance to all U.S. attorneys emphasizing the importance of prosecuting immigration offenses. Okay, so all the attorney general offices have been directed to do this, but I find more chilling to a certain effect is once they do their investigations, any decision not to pursue charges relating to immigration-related conduct must be reported up the stream of command to something called urgent reports. And they're also charged to investigate local and state actors who resist, obstruct, or otherwise fail to comply with the administration's enforcement agreements. And those decisions on a local level, not the prosecutor also reported to whoever looks at the urgent reports. So not only are they looking at them, but they're reporting who they think is not following the party line. Number five, rescind Garland's policy constraining ability to subpoena journalists during leak investigations. Now, for years, members of both parties in the Congress have advanced a bill, Reporters' Shield legislation, but it was never put into law. So the Trump administration is rescinding this policy, which made it pretty hard to subpoena journalists' records, phone calls or email records. But this new policy is to be deployed, as they say, as a last resort when essential to successful investigation or prosecution. And it's nice. They're also saying that journalists are going to be given advance notice so they can challenge the decision. Nice that journalists have that right as opposed to people who are being deported, but they're special, right? Okay, so this one drives me nuts. Prohibit the U.S. government from combating the spread of misinformation and disinformation. I've kind of called this in my mind, calling the kettle black. And I'm just going to read what is in Project 2025 because it is just so outrageous as to what they're saying has happened in the past, and it's really happening right now. So Project 2025 says the United States government, and by extension the FBI, have absolutely no business policing speech, whether in the public square, in print, or online. That's good. The First Amendment prohibits it. The United States is the world's last best hope for self-government, and its survival relies on the ability of our people to have healthy debate free from government intervention and censorship. The government, through its officials, is certainly able to speak and provide information to the public. That is a healthy component of an informed society, but government must never manipulate the scales and censor information that is potentially harmful to it or its political leadership. This is the way of totalitarian dictatorships, not of free constitutional republics. Well, that's all true, but that is exactly, from my point of view, is what they're doing. They're threatening people with arrest. If you say the word Palestine, you're anti-Semitic. NPR, PBS are being cut. The news channels are being maligned left and right. So according to that executive order, there will no longer be any misinformation or disinformation. Yeah, right. Number 7, to immediately end any policies, investigations, or cases that run contrary to administration policies. So, the shorthand for this is either their way or the highway. And the executive order, it has a lot of details, and it's not just saying do this, do this, do this, but it gives some background. That executive order makes it clear that Joe Biden and those who work for him are the target. It goes on to say they're protesting that the insurrectionists who attempted a violent overthrow of the 2020 election on Trump's behalf were ruthlessly prosecuted. So what's going to be happening with this one is that the Department of Justice has been charged to go back 4 years and identify any instances where a department or an agency's conduct appears to have been contrary to the purposes and policies of this order. Now, so that, that's being made retroactive. So 4 years ago, this wasn't the policy, but if someone at that point in time was doing something that was not in line with the current policy, people have been fired, they've been demoted, people have resigned, but they're going after folks for going back 4 years. And this executive order on weaponizing the federal government is consistent with Trump's goal of retribution, which he expressed so many times on the campaign trail. As early as August of 2023, Trump posted on his Truth Social platform, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." In a recent interview with Sean Hannity, Trump reaffirmed this thirst for vengeance, saying, "I spent millions of dollars in legal fees and I won, but I did it the hard way. It's really hard to say that they shouldn't have to go through it also." And then we have the brilliant person, Kash Patel, who's now the FBI director. And in one of his books, he made a list of 60 people who he considers the most dangerous threat to our democracy. So he has a list, Trump has his list, and that list changes, sound like from day to day, but of people that he thinks are out to get him. And Patel said also in 2023, "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media." And then went on to say, "We are coming after you." Okay, put it another way, this executive order suggesting that the Biden administration weaponized the government, actually Trump is laying out how his administration could do the same. Now, one of the things that they are doing, all of this was pretty hard for me to read. Being a lawyer, I did criminal defense for a number of years, so I was involved somewhat with constitutional law, but so much is so contrary to everything I think about the law that it was hard to read. I said, I can't take this anymore, but I persevered. So in the law, I mean, if there's an alleged crime, there's some investigation that's done, and then if there's enough evidence, the person is charged and goes up, go to trial, plead guilty, the case is dismissed, whatever. But now there's this gentleman, Ed Martin, who works for the Justice Department, and his take on investigations and prosecution of cases is a little different. So he plans to use his authority to expose and discredit those he believes to be guilty, even if he cannot find sufficient evidence to prosecute them. So what he has said is, if they can be charged, we'll charge them. But if they can't be charged, we will name them, and we will name them. And in a culture that respects shame, they should be people that are ashamed. And he added, that's the way things work. Well, that may be the way the things work now, but has not ever been, as far as I'm aware, that has never been the criminal procedure in this country. A couple other things that are of concern, I'm not going to go through all the specifics, but in terms of bias in action or inappropriate overreach by prosecutors and the Trump administration the conditional suspension of the prosecution against the mayor of New York, kind of a quid pro quo, you could call it, that there were no legal reasons to dismiss the charge, but he couldn't carry out his mayoral duties while under indictment, and specifically his cooperation with ICE in the Trump administration on immigration. So that's pretty weird. I'm going to dismiss this, but you got to do something for us. And there's also an attack going on against Chris Krebs, who was the former head of cybersecurity and infrastructure. And in that executive order, he is deemed a significant bad actor who weaponized and abused his authority when he falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. So his security clearance has been revoked and he's under investigation. There's another individual, Miles Taylor, who worked for the Department of Homeland Security, and he wrote a book or an article or a book in 2018 where he criticized Trumpian type of policies, but now they're going back and investigating him, and he's been accused of treason, pretty strong claim there, treason. So whether he'll be charged or not, we'll wait and see. Then we have the issue of, the ridiculous, am I supposed to be like neutral in this? Because I can't be. The ridiculous pardons of the January 6th those prosecutions, in the pardon of all those folks who were convicted. Most of them pled guilty. And then we also have the targeting of law firms. And these are law firms that, like I said, in a general sense, in the past have worked for the Democratic Party or are currently working. So they've been targeted. Some have held the line and said, no, we're not going to cave. Others have caved and have been roundly criticized by the lawyer community, and they're donating, millions of dollars in pro bono work in exchange for not being targeted by the administration. Another little esoteric one, in a certain respect, is take the position that Humphrey's executor violates the separation of powers. Well, Humphrey's executor is a 1935 Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court said the president couldn't remove Federal Trade Commission members for reasons other than those specified by Congress. Now, the Supreme Court has shown a willingness to narrow its application, and if it goes forward and down that path, narrowing that application increases presidential powers. And the ninth one that has been accomplished as of early June is that the department should withdraw from lawsuits seeking to uphold the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act abortion requirements. So the Department of Justice and their lawyers, they represent the government. And when the government's sued, they defend the government, or sometimes they initiate cases to challenge, state laws or things. But the case that the Department of Justice is now withdrawing from involves Idaho women who were refused care or flown out of state while miscarrying because doctors in Idaho feared their interventions would be considered a violation of the state's ban on abortions, even when the pregnancy was non-viable. Fortunately, as of right now, the case is still proceeding, as there is another plaintiff in the case, in addition to the Department of Justice, St. Luke's Hospital. So that is still going forward. So across the board, as to what has happened so far, I think a pretty good overview of them is that partisanship is the game that's being played. Threats of prosecution, intimidation, outright unlawful behavior. I don't know, it was a senator or a congressperson who got arrested, and I think even thrown to the floor for asking a question at a congressional hearing about whatever. And judges have been arrested. Judges have been threatened. It's pretty out of control. But on the bright side, there's a whole slew of constitutional attorneys, and whether you consider them progressive or not, but serious constitutional attorneys that are working together to fight back against this. And I don't read all the legal blogs, but there are a lot of legal blogs, daily, what's going on in the Supreme Court, federal courts, and that could be a whole nother discussion at some point. So that is the overview of what has happened to date. There's some other things in progress, and some of the things have not yet been started. So that is what I had to say. I hope that kind of meets what your expectation was for today. If not, you can open the floor to other questions, topics, your thoughts on the changes in the Justice Department that you think are good, you're concerned about, just what kind of open the floor. And Sam, are you going to call on folks, or how does this work?
Yeah, I was just curious. It just seems like after the horribleness of this chapter, that we all want to just hang ourselves. But do you think this is the direct response of why the Democratic people were targeted in Minnesota?
Oh, the ones who were murdered?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
The fact that yeah.
I don't know if it's a direct correlation, but clearly the climate, there have been, threats from actual, Trump and government officials, actual threats against, the judges are insane, they should be impeached. There's a lot of rhetoric that either is from MAGA or from the administration, and the administration is doing nothing, as far as I can see, to tone down, that kind of inflammatory language. So yeah, it as far as I know from what happened there, they were targeted because I guess they were Democrats and opposing Trump in some way, shape, or form, at least in the eyes of the shooter.
Do you think we should talk to our sheriff about Leelanau County and what he plans to do to ensure the safety of all of our citizens?
Oh, someone else want to chime in on that? Who wants to go?
Well, I know
the sheriff taught. I know him pretty well. He will give you the answer that you kind of want to hear. Of course, he's going to do all that. Of course, he's not going to target anybody. Of course, he's not going to call ICE on his own, but he'll be backup. He says the right things, and hopefully, he'll stand firm to that. But
well, I know he showed up at the Glen Arbor protest.
That's what I saw somewhere. I don't know what was what did he do there?
Yeah, and people there said he came to protect us. And I was just kind of curious if, he didn't show up in anywhere else, right? Not in Cedar, not in Sutton's Bay. I was just kind of wondering, because you think about the patriots that meet at the Friendship Center every Tuesday morning, and that a lot of them are fully behind all of these statements that you just read. And I just kind of wonder how many of them will get unleashed.
Well, I guess we just have to keep an eye on that. And if it goes to actual verbal threats or actual acts of violence, we got to be knocking on if not the sheriff's door, the prosecutor's door, and say, this is not right.
Yeah. Okay, Rebecca, did you want to say something?
Clicking the wrong thing, sorry to unmute. I have a question. If anybody knows, I mean, is it the sheriff's responsibility to provide security to elected officials and public officials in Leelanau County, or is that a state level, or how does that work? Well,
there is no formal, don't tell anybody, but there is no formal security for any elected official in Leelanau County. When I was a judge, when I was on the bench, we would have bailiffs, armed, retired deputies. And I guess if I would think if any of the officials were being threatened, or I was being threatened as a judge, I mean, they would put something into effect. But it was kind of chilling remark by Judge Ludig, the retired judge. He was on TV saying about the threats against judges and the need for security. And what really chilled me to the bone is he said that if he was still on the bench, currently federal judges are protected by the marshals, federal marshals, who operate under the DOJ. He said that if he was still on the bench, he would not trust the federal marshals. He would have his own private security. Now that is chilling. Now, would I feel that I couldn't trust the deputies in my courtroom? I have no reason to think that I don't know, but that's pretty chilling. He would have private security rather than relying on the federal marshals, whose job is to secure the safety of federal judges.
And will local governments be forced to pony up for the security, to pay for the security of their elected officials, or is that does that have to come out of their own pocket?
Well, if the protection is offered by the sheriff's department, their deputies, that's in their budget. But if there's additional security, the board of commissioners would have to figure out how to fund that.
Interesting.
This is not in the court. Security is not in the court budget.
Not in their budget.
No.
Interesting.
So
Rick, you want to chime in? You've read the whole gosh darn document.
after that depressing road we just went down, what kind of actions are people thinking they would want to do? So I know Rob has a plan. Rob, go ahead.
No, I don't have a plan, but no, Marianne, I don't know if you saw it, but the ABA actually filed suit against Trump's administration. I put the link in the chat. If you didn't see that, that's an interesting development. Now, the ABA is not is an association, so it is the bars at the state have binding over the attorneys who are members of the bar within that state. But this is an interesting development because it was a very clear statement in terms of what the bar association finds with regards to the, to